welcome. Thanks for joining me. My name is Eileen Chevalier and I created the typewriter alphabet. With the flashcards, we are looking at botany, and today we're going to look at cells. So this is the first of 2 lessons on cells. And in this lesson, we're really going to look at atoms specifically. So it might be a little more advanced, but it's a pretty good introduction. I'm not going to get really in depth, but I do want to introduce some general concepts to you, because they're pretty foundational as we're looking at how the entire cell functions together. From zygotes with just 1 cell to the trillions in humans or mature trees, cells work together to complete everything required for life. In this lesson, we're going to look at how the energy works within the atoms that create cells. So even deeper than the cell level, cells are made of all of those tiny atoms. So get out your materials. You're going to need, of course, your flashcards. The flashcard that we're using for these lessons is W, and this one doesn't talk a lot about atoms. We'll use this more in the next lesson. And then you'll also use the DK Ultimate Visual Dictionary, and we're going to use this section where called Physics and Chemistry. These are going to be the only couple lessons that we use this section, but it's amazing. And there are lots of great sections in this book, not just the ones for biology or botany. So we're going to branch out a little bit today. But first, I'm going to read you a couple definitions. So pull out your journals and I'll read these for you. Cells, tiny building blocks that link together to build all living things. So quick caveat, you can have most of existence is made up of 1-celled organisms. They far outnumber the rest of us. So you can have an organism that's only 1 cell, or you can have organisms that are made of many cells. So a single cell can be an entire organism, or your organism can need trillions. Like my body has trillions of cells that make me up, okay? Next one is atoms. Tiny balls of energy that are the building blocks of cells. All right, so here's some questions for us today. The first one's really big. I'm going to explain some major ideas about energy to you. Atoms connect to create molecules. Molecules connect to create the structures that form organelles, which work together as cells. So when you have all of these different organelles doing all these different jobs, they work together, and that creates the cell, right? So just like my human body is made up of lots of different things, right? So I've got my skin. It'd be pretty hard to have my body without my skin. So just in that same way, the cell is going to have a cell membrane. And then my brain, pretty important, right? So I need my brain to function. I need my mouth to function, need my eyes, my stomach, my heart. These are all different organs that I have in my body, and they are going to work together and support each other, and all of those things are going to allow me to do all the human things that I do every day. The same exact thing happens on a cellular level. So for that 1 cell to work, there are all of these different, they're not called organs because they're small, so they're called organelles, which really is just kind of like a little organ within the cell. And we're going to talk a lot about those in the cells 2 lesson. But right now we're going to talk about the atoms that actually create each one of those little organelles. So how do all of the atoms stick together, right? This is the question. So there are 3 main keys that we're going to talk about for how atoms interact with each other. The first one is that atoms need to be neutral, right? So if you have a number of electrons, 2 electrons, it's going to want 2 protons. So that's basically just like saying if you have 2 positive things, you want 2 negative things. Anytime it's pushing you in one direction, it's getting pushed back the other direction. So there's this neutrality. When things are not neutral, crazy stuff happens. Like lightning happens because the electrons build up and the protons build up, and the electrons everything wants to be neutral, right? So the Earth is trying to balance itself out, and it creates lightning, and all this electricity starts shooting through the air because you can't have too much positive things in one area and too many negative things in the other area. So those things want to balance each other out. So there is a need to be neutral. Energy is called positive, which we'll just use a plus sign in here, or negative. I'm just using a negative sign for that. Positive and negative, it's just two ways of thinking about it. If you think about a number line, they all want to be 0, right? So like 0 is ideal. So if you have some things on this side if you go in one direction on the number line, you got to come back the other direction because you want to be at 0. So, and it's not just within an atom, it's really within the universe. That's how the energy moves around and wants to work. So protons are in the center, so in the nucleus of the atom, and the electrons are orbiting the nucleus. So the way they orbit is not like the way the planets orbit the sun, but you could kind of think about that to just sort of wrap your mind around it. So the sun is really huge, right? So compared to the sun, the Earth is really tiny, and the Earth is going around the sun. So in that way, it's kind of similar because the center of an atom is really huge, and then it has these tiny little packets of energy that are flying around faster than you could ever imagine. So, but they don't go in like nice circles. They do all kinds of crazy things. So, second important thing. First was they need to be neutral. Second thing, atoms seek full shells. So atoms like having full shells even more than they like being neutral. So first I told you they like to be neutral. Now if you know a lot about chemistry, you're like, she's crazy. There's ions and cations and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, first we're going to talk about being neutral. Then we're going to talk about the next thing, which is having full shells. So remember how I told you that the Earth is like circling around, and there's this tiny little packet of energy circling around this huge nucleus of the atom where the protons are, also some neutrons. There's a lot going on in there. But the positive pieces are in the center, and these negative pieces are orbiting around. But when they orbit around, there's a pattern to how they orbit around the nucleus, and they call them shells, right? So it's just, think about like, in an onion, you have all these layers. It's not really like that because you're not going in, but there's like a certain number of them that they like to have. They're like, in this drawer, I like to have 8 pairs of socks because that fills up my drawer. If I only have 2 pairs of socks, this is weird. So they might want to get rid of the 2 pairs of socks so that they have a nice empty drawer and their other drawer is full. Or they might want to steal someone else's 2 socks and put them in their drawer so that their drawer is nice and full. They want to have that shell nice and full. So I'm going to show you some pictures. So this is page 308 and 309. And you can see some of the crazy shells. They're not circles. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But there's a certain number of them that they want to have in each one of those shells, okay? They're willing to steal and they're willing to give away in order to have full shells. Atoms like having full shells even more than being neutral. So they often gain or lose electrons and become positively or negatively charged. And that's when you start having ions or cations. Okay. Final one, third key. And I know this is taking a while, but there's a lot going on with energy. So much I'm not going to cover. So the third key thing to remember is that opposites attract. And you have probably heard that before. So what does that mean? Positively charged atoms, which are cations, with missing electrons. So let's say they had that drawer with only 2 socks and they threw their socks out. Now it's a cation. Okay, because they're missing 2 of their packets of energy. And then over here, those guys would cling to negatively charged atoms, which are anions with extra electrons. So this guy over here took the extra electrons, filled up his drawers, and now it's an anion. And they're all ions, but those are the two kinds. So you either have extra ones or you don't have enough electrons. And then they like each other. So they're like, hey, you have what I'm missing. I'm missing 2 socks because I want to be neutral, but I gave those socks away because I wanted my nice clean drawer. It either has to be full or empty. And the other guy's like, yeah, you're missing 2 socks. I feel like I just have too many socks, but I have this nice full drawer, but I like you because you're missing some. And so they like to be friends because one of them has extra and one of them has too few. The way in which atoms cling to one another creates the form and function of molecules. So every single molecule, which is the next step, so you've got atoms and then you've got molecules. Molecules are when the guy with the extra electrons meets up with the guy with the too few electrons, and they hang out together, right? But depending on how many there were different and which one's being more pushy, it forms a certain bond. And all of those bonds are different because there's so many elements and then they all combine with each other in different ways. And sometimes you have a lot of different atoms coming together and having lots of different relationships within that same molecule. So it can get really complicated. And the shape of all of those things and the way that the energy flows through that molecule determines what it's going to do. Do you need to know about atoms to understand cells? How does a cell do work, such as harness energy from the sun, form and destroy protein molecules, form and reform strands of the cytoskeleton, which we'll learn more about later, or monitor the molecules passing in and out of the cell membrane? All of these are incredibly, and that's just like a tiny bit of what the cell is doing. So how important is it that you understand and you may think it's important and you may think it's not important. That's totally fine. And the more you find out, the more you may realize the importance is different than you thought. So keep trying to understand, and your understanding of how important that is will probably change over time. So wherever you're at right now, that's where you're at, and be able to just clarify that for yourself. How and where is the energy of the sun turned into energy that cells use to do work? Now, people spend months researching this in school and learning about it, and researchers themselves spend years trying to figure out all these things. So I don't expect you to know the answer to this question, but I do want you to think about photosynthesis. I mean, this is what plants do. This is why they're important. This is how we eat. Like everything that we eat is dependent on the sun and dependent on plants turning that energy from the sun into food that we eat or that the animals that we eat. So it's a pretty big deal how that energy gets turned into everything else in the world. So think about that. And then in your journal, I have one activity for today, which is to examine the diagrams on page 308 and 9 of the Visual Dictionary. Make your own drawing, or you can just copy some out of the book. Take notes from the video lesson and record any questions that you have. So you probably have a bunch of questions. It's super complicated. You can spend many, many semesters in college studying all of this. I just want you to get some basics, but I do want you to write down questions that you have because those will help you to find the answers. So when you write down a question, it helps you to find the answer in the future. So write them down. Yes. So I did write in parentheses, don't worry, scientists all over the world are still trying to answer this question. How does energy work? But this is the question that I have for you, is how can your continuing investigations of energy contribute to our collective understanding of how energy works? I believe that there are those of you out there who will come to understand energy in new and creative ways. If you're really into it, my favorite book. Let's see if I can remember it. I'm not super good with names. The Disappearing Spoon. Okay, it's amazing. And it's about the periodic table, but it's just the most amazing, fantastic story, history. Talks about all these different people who are discovering things. It's really just like a storybook about different people who are discovering different atoms, but it's also about how those atoms work and the crazy things they do. So if you're really interested and you're looking for something else, then that is a great one. I'm going to show you this page one more time that I was talking about for you to copy some diagrams from. And then I just want to show you, you've probably already seen the periodic table, but I'm going to show you again the one that they have in here. Just so you can get an idea of all of these different elements that are going to come together and create these molecules. So there's a lot of different ones, and how they interact just depends on what their characteristics are, and then what the characteristics of the atom that they're combining with are. How do they relate on the periodic table? So enjoy that little tiny introduction to chemistry and energy. And I will see you next time when we will talk about the organelles that are created using all those atoms and molecules. Thanks, guys. Bye.